The phone rang just as I set down the last breakfast plate. Wiping my hands on my apron, I reached for the receiver. On the other end, my younger son, Micah, a co-pilot whose voice usually carried brightness, sounded strangely subdued. "Mom," he whispered, "something odd is going on. Sabrina just boarded my flight to Paris, and I'm holding her passport in my hand." I froze. Upstairs, the shower still thundered. And then, almost mockingly, Sabrina's cheerful voice drifted down the stairs. "I'll be quick, Mom." Pressing the receiver tightly to my ear, my heart hammered. "Micah, she's here." I heard her. "She's upstairs." The pause on his end stretched long enough for me to catch the sound of his breath. Then, firmer, lower, he said, "Mom, I'm staring at her right now. Seat 2A. She's leaning in close to a man in a fine suit." At that exact moment, the bathroom door creaked open behind me. Footsteps followed, and a voice called out warmly, "Glad you're home." My name is Ruth Calder, and that morning was the first entry in the notebook I would later title the Ledger of Truth. If you've ever felt torn between what your eyes show and what your heart fears, stay with me. That was the day I learned family can split in two. My name is Ruth Calder, and I've called Asheville, North Carolina, home for more than 30 years. I am 66, widowed for a decade, and for most of that time this house has been the anchor of my family. My eldest son, Grant, is a thoughtful architect, forever surrounded by blueprints and half-finished cups of coffee. His wife, Sabrina, entered our lives with quick hands in the kitchen and a polished smile. Together they have Theo, my 7-year-old grandson, brimming with endless questions and energy that brightens even the dullest afternoons. My younger son, Micah, is a co-pilot, always chasing the sky. His calls between flights fill my house with warmth and pride. I've always believed my late husband, Mark, would be proud of the family we built. For a long while, I thought Sabrina was the missing piece, a daughter I never had. She was tidy, always humming as she worked, and had a way of soothing Theo that made me grateful she was part of our family. But I also remembered something Mark once told me. When your mind feels noisy, Ruth, write down what's true. Those words would come back to guide me when cracks began to appear in this quiet home. Micah's voice rarely faltered, but that morning it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. He explained that, before boarding, he had rushed back to the gate for some paperwork. On the floor near the jetway, he spotted a passport. He picked it up, intending to hand it to the desk agent, but when he opened it, he froze. The photo was unmistakably Sabrina's. Name, birth date, everything matched. I forced a laugh. "Honey, it must be a mistake. Maybe someone who looks like her. Sabrina's upstairs right now." Silence lingered. Then he whispered, "Mom, I checked the cabin myself. She's in seat 2A. I know her walk, her hair, the way she crosses her legs. And she wasn't alone. There's a man in a tailored suit, cufflinks flashing." They were leaning close, like lovers. My pulse raced. I stared toward the staircase where steam still spilled from the bathroom. It felt as if my home and that airplane existed in two separate worlds at the same time. Micah's last words before the announcement blared over the intercom chilled me. "Mom," she looked right at me, smiled, then turned away like I was a stranger. In the days after, small contradictions began to surface, clinging to my thoughts. At first, I brushed them aside, but once Micah's words lodged in my mind, every detail grew sharper. One morning, I watched Sabrina write a grocery list with her right hand, neat and precise. The very next day, she scribbled a note for Theo's lunchbox with her left, messy and uneven. When I asked about it, she laughed lightly. "Just practicing, Mom. Keeps the brain sharp." I smiled, but unease tightened in my chest. Her moods, too, swung unpredictably. One night she sang a lullaby, tenderly guiding Theo to sleep. The next, when he spilled water at dinner, she snapped, calling him careless. The sudden shift left me staring, wondering which side was real. Even her clothes unsettled me. She left for the market in a white blouse, basket in her right hand. Hours later, she returned wearing navy, the basket dangling from her left. When I asked why, she shrugged it off. "Spilled something." Then came the subtle gestures. The way she stirred soup counterclockwise, though I had always seen her stir the other way. Or how she reached for the wrong cabinet, as if she didn't know the kitchen at all. Mark's old words rang louder. When behavior contradicts biography, write it down. And so I did. Soon, I realized I wasn't the only one noticing. One afternoon, Mrs. Swidham dropped off a dish. Smiling politely, she tilted her head. Ruth, isn't your daughter-in-law right-handed? She gave me this with her left yesterday. I nearly asked if she'd hurt her wrist. At the bakery, Mr. Paddle shared his own experience. Strangest thing, he said as he handed me Theo's favorite rolls. Last week, she praised my cardamom buns and laughed like an old friend. But today she hardly spoke. Didn't look up. Paid exact change. Walked right out. And then came the hardest truth from Theo himself. While coloring, he set down his crayon and whispered, Grandma, I like nice voice mom better than storm voice mom. I hugged him tightly, kissing his hair as my throat closed. Out of the mouth of a child came what adults often deny. There weren't just mood swings. There were two versions of Sabrina living among us, and my grandson already sensed the split. That night, I pulled out an old spiral notebook from a drawer where I kept envelopes and stamps. If my mind was going to spin, I needed something steady. On the first page, I wrote Ledger of Truth. I began with the basics, dates, times, actions. Nothing embellished, only facts. 3:10 p.m., Sabrina leaves with red basket. 5:55 p.m., returns with blue basket. Explanation, borrowed it from a friend. Next line, bedtime. Yesterday, sang lullaby. Tonight, refused, left Theo in tears. At first, it felt strange, documenting my own daughter-in-law like an investigator. But once the ink dried, I noticed something. I felt calmer. Paper was neutral. Paper wouldn't argue back. And so, day by day, the notebook filled. Signed with her left hand. White blouse in the morning, navy by evening. Warm tone on Monday, cold silence by Tuesday. As I filled each line, I heard my husband's advice echoing, when your thoughts spin, write down what's real. So I did. And for anyone hearing this now, remember, when life makes you doubt your own senses, put pen to paper. Write a simple line with a date and an action. June 12th, 5:40 p.m., she raised her voice at dinner. That one small record can cut through the haze. It won't grant instant peace, but it will give you solid ground. For weeks, I wrote in my ledger, believing that one more entry would finally make sense of it all. But the contradictions only deepened. Ink alone wasn't enough. I needed clarity. So I reached out to my oldest friend, Carol. We had raised our boys side by side, shared laughter, casseroles, and losses. Over coffee, I slid the notebook across the table. She turned page after page, her brow furrowing tighter. At last she said, Ruth, this isn't in your head. If you want the truth, you might have to follow her. The thought chilled me, trailing my own daughter-in-law. But Carol's words stayed. Not to accuse her, to protect Grant and Theo. One Saturday, with Grant at the office and Theo busy at school, the chance came. Sabrina came down in a pale yellow dress, wicker basket on her arm. Off to the market, Mom, she smiled. I waited for the gate to latch, then pulled a shawl around me and slipped out, staying well behind her. She walked the familiar street, but turned left instead of right, into a narrow lane lined with rusted fences and peeling paint. My heart pounded. I ducked behind bicycles as she tapped softly on a weathered door marked 14. It opened and she stepped inside. Minutes later, I returned home, breath unsteady, only to find her in the kitchen, in a different blouse, calmly chopping vegetables. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the yellow dress disappearing into that alley, then the blouse waiting for me in the kitchen. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I tucked a family photo into my purse, the one of Grant, Sabrina, and Theo smiling on the porch, and went back to number 14. The alley was hushed, sunlight barely touching the cracked pavement. My hand shook as I knocked. The door opened, and there she was, same height, same dark hair, same eyes as Sabrina, but her posture was different, smaller, uneasy. She clutched a rag like she might slam the door shut. Before she could, another voice inside called gently, Isla, you can't keep hiding. A young woman appeared, Jenna Park, a nursing student renting the other room. She looked at me kindly. Come in, Mrs. Calder. You deserve to know. Inside was a bare space, concrete floors, patched walls, the faint sting of disinfectant. An older man coughed weakly on a cot in the corner under a threadbare blanket. The woman who looked like Sabrina lowered her gaze. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm not Sabrina. My name is Isla Hart. I sank into a chair, clutching the photo. Then why, I asked, have I seen you in my home? Isla's voice cracked. Because she pays me. To watch Theo, to run her errands, to take her place when she can't. I didn't want to, but my parents need medicine. The money was too much to refuse. At last, my ledger had a face. A name. A truth I wasn't ready for. Isla twisted the rag in her hands until her knuckles turned white. Then Jenna placed a worn envelope on the table. You should see this. Inside were old hospital records. My heart stopped at the date of birth, identical to Sabrina's. Same hospital, same hour. Jenna explained, years ago, a nurse had found a struggling couple with newborn twins. Unable to raise both, they kept one child and gave the other away. Isla was raised by a kind but poor woman who worked endless hours to provide. I never knew my real family, Isla murmured. When I met Sabrina at the market, I thought it was coincidence. She laughed that we looked like twins. Then she offered money for me to cover her life, sometimes. She never once told me we might be related. The puzzle finally aligned, the shifts in handwriting, the sudden mood changes, the quick swaps of clothing. It wasn't my imagination. It was two sisters living one life. And then Jenna delivered the last piece. One night, I saw Sabrina at a cafe with a man named Victor Lang. They were close, laughing, calling each other honey. Micah's words echoed in my head. Seat 2A, leaning in like a couple. The motive was clear now. Sabrina needed a double, so her husband and child never suspected she was living another life with Victor. She used her own twin to keep it hidden. I left the house trembling, but strangely calm. The fog had cleared. Isla wasn't the enemy. She was trapped in Sabrina's deceit. And my family, Grant and Theo, were the ones under shadow. Back home, I sat with my ledger. For the first time, I didn't record another entry. Instead, I wrote a single sentence. It is time to bring light into the room. That evening, I called Micah. Bring me the boarding records from that Paris flight. Lay them on the table. My voice left no room for hesitation. The next day, I moved through the house with steady resolve. I set the oak table with our best white cloth, lit candles, cooked Theo's favorites, roasted fish, chili cornbread, sweet tea. This wasn't celebration. It was a line in the sand, before and after. As I folded the napkins, I repeated my shield. This isn't about punishing Sabrina. It's about protecting a child. At 7, everything was ready. Grant was nearly home, Theo already excited for his favorite meal. And outside, waiting nervously, was Isla. That night, she would no longer play Sabrina. She would stand as herself. The house was warm with food and candlelight when Grant came in. He glanced at the table, surprised. What's the occasion, Mom? He asked, loosening his tie. I only smiled. Sit, son. Tonight, we talk as a family. Sabrina arrived shortly after, polished smile in place, pale blue dress flowing. She kissed Theo's forehead, sat down like nothing was amiss. But then came the knock. When I opened the door, Isla stepped inside, pale, hands clasped. Theo's eyes widened. He looked between them and whispered, Why are there two moms? My heart ached, but I knelt. There aren't two moms, sweetheart. There are two sisters. And tonight the truth comes out. The room fell silent. I read aloud from my ledger, dates, times, details impossible to ignore. I laid down Micah's Paris boarding records. Then Jenna entered from the back, her voice steady as she recounted seeing Sabrina with Victor. I turned to Sabrina. You owe us honesty. Tell the truth, or I will. Her mask cracked. She slammed her palm on the table. Fine. Yes, I have someone else. Victor gives me the life I deserve. I'm tired of this house, this small life. Grant's face drained, his jaw tight. And Theo? Is he too small for you? Theo's little voice broke the silence. Grandma, Did I do something bad? Tears blurred my vision. I pulled him close. No, darling. You did nothing wrong. Adults make choices, and we have to set them right. Sabrina shoved her chair back, eyes blazing at Isla, then stormed out. The door closed, but the echo lingered like thunder. The truth lay on the table now, undeniable. And though grief filled the room, the shadows were gone. The days after felt like walking through ruins. Grant worked silently, divorce papers stacking on his desk. Sabrina signed them without looking back, left the courthouse with Victor, and erased her family as if they'd never been hers. Theo struggled most. Some nights he asked why his mom didn't come sing. But slowly, another presence eased the ache. Isla visited, not as a stand-in, but as herself. She sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching birds with Theo. Her laughter gentle, her patience steady. Soon he called her Auntie Isa, then simply Mom. One afternoon, I watched from the porch as Grant showed Isla how to tie tomato vines in the garden. Theo darted happily between them. The heaviness in my chest softened. A wound was healing, not forgotten, but carried with grace. Months later, under strings of backyard lights, Grant slipped a ring onto Isla's hand. Theo stood proudly as best man in a jacket too big. Tears filled my eyes, but they were tears of hope. So to anyone listening, keep a ledger when life feels uncertain. Write dates, details, truths. Let it anchor you. Ask the hard questions before silence grows heavier. And above all, protect the child first. If this story touched you, tap like so others can hear it too. Share where you're listening from. I treasure every note. And if you've kept your own ledger, tell us, what truth did it bring back to you?